When people talk about progress in Alabama and maybe more largely in the South, my sense of it, especially in Alabama, is that progress can feel like whiplash. Like, as soon as there's movement forward, backlash can come just as quickly.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Alexis Okeowo, a writer for The New Yorker who has a great new book out about Alabama, where she grew up. The book dives into the state's history and culture, bringing in perspectives from marginalized groups, Confederate sympathizers, and Okeowo's own experiences there as the child of Nigerian immigrants. My conversation with her is coming up in just a bit. Also, in our Arts and Culture segment, we'll take a look at a striking new exhibit in Fort Worth, Texas, from the painter David Jeremiah. But first, it's time for our news roundup. This week, a handful of stories that in various ways are follow-ups to things we've talked about in recent episodes. As always, you can find links to more information about all of these in the show notes. First, a measles outbreak in Georgia. The state's Department of Public Health reported last week that an initial case reported by a Georgia State University student in Atlanta had spread to at least 3 more people. At least 2 of those new cases are people who were not vaccinated against measles, according to the department. The vaccination status of the third person was unknown. The student who caught the initial infection was also unvaccinated. You might recall that back in June, we talked extensively about the growth of the anti-vaccine movement across the South, which started well before Robert F. Kennedy Jr. brought his anti-vaccine crusade to the Federal Department of Health and Human Services. Georgia has not taken the kinds of steps enacted recently by states like Florida and Texas to make it easier for parents to opt their children out of vaccine requirements. Even so, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the state has seen a significant drop in childhood vaccinations as anti-vaccine rhetoric has become widespread in conservative politics. In 2023, just 88.4% of Georgia's kindergarten students had received the combined measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, which was down 5 percentage points from the 2019-20 school year. Doctors say a population needs to maintain a 95% vaccination rate in order to have herd immunity, which means that any isolated cases are unlikely to create an outbreak. With the new cases, Georgia is up to 10 confirmed measles cases this year. Last year, there were only 6 in the whole state, which came in 2 clusters of 3 in 2 families. Those cases were among unvaccinated people as well. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there have been 1,514 cases of measles logged nationwide so far this year, with more than half of those, 803, coming from a large outbreak in Texas. Georgia public health officials say they are working to contain the spread there to prevent a similar surge. This year has already seen the most measles cases of any year this century, surpassing an outbreak in 2019 that produced 1,274 cases. In fact, this year will have the highest measles caseload in the United States since at least 1992, when there were 2,126. That came at the end of the last huge surge of measles that the United States has seen to date, which peaked with 27,808 cases in 1990. It was brought down by a federal and state focus on making sure that all families had affordable access to measles vaccines. Obviously, that focus at both the federal and many of our state levels has started to slip. I also wanted to just call your attention to an op-ed column in the South Carolina Daily Gazette about one impact of the state's ban on most abortions past the 6th week of pregnancy. The author, Christine Glang, wrote about her experience last year as an expectant mother. She was pregnant and wanted the child, fully hoping to carry it to term. But during a regular ultrasound at just 9 weeks, she was devastated to learn that the fetus had stopped developing 3 weeks earlier and had no heartbeat. The standard medical procedure in such cases is to remove the non-viable fetus via dilation and curettage, or D&C. It is recommended to do this as quickly as possible because the dead tissue carries a risk of infection that can lead to sepsis and even death. Last year, women in both Texas and Georgia died as a result of such infections. But because of South Carolina's ban, Glang wrote, her doctor was unwilling to perform the procedure until waiting 11 days to conduct a second ultrasound. This was despite a provision in the state law that allows for removal of a, quote, dead unborn child. Afraid of what might happen if she waited nearly 2 weeks with the fetus inside her, Glang decided to travel to Virginia, the closest state with readily accessible abortion care, and pay $3,000 out of pocket to have the potentially life-saving procedure. She writes, quote, I was fortunate to have the resources and support to travel. Many South Carolina women do not. Those without the means will be left to risk their fertility, their health, and their lives because politicians decided their suffering was an acceptable price for a political talking point. Glang wrote her article against the backdrop of a push underway in South Carolina right now to create even more roadblocks to reproductive health care. A bill currently under consideration in a special session of the state legislature would introduce restrictions already in place in many southern states, including a ban on the manufacture, distribution, or possession of abortion-inducing drugs, the criminalization of providing information or assistance to someone seeking an abortion, the removal of exceptions to the abortion ban in cases of rape, incest, or fatal fetal anomalies, like the one Glang experienced, and a provision that would allow family members of someone who has an abortion to sue the doctors involved along with anyone who provided help or assistance in obtaining it. If the law passes, Glang writes, quote, a 6th-grade girl could be forced to give birth after being raped by a family member. A mother of 2 could be forced to carry a pregnancy with a fatal fetal anomaly, only to watch her baby die shortly after birth. These aren't hypotheticals. They are the brutal, real-world consequences of laws like this, unquote. She adds, quote, today I am in my 3rd trimester of a new pregnancy, and while I am deeply grateful, I remain painfully aware of how fragile pregnancy can be. Every appointment brings both joy and anxiety, and I can't help but think about how easily I, or anyone else, could face another crisis. And we'll wrap up with some potentially good news, courtesy of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. You may recall that I talked with the group's executive director, Steve Smith, just a few weeks ago about the future of renewable energy in the Southeast. SACE released a new report last week, along with Atlas Public Policy, which predicts continued growth in electric vehicle manufacturing and purchasing in the South, despite the curtailing of Biden-era incentives by the Trump administration. The report notes that the Southeast leads the country in making electric vehicles and batteries, with an estimated 75,000 jobs. In just the past 12 months, there have been $4.8 billion in new EV-related investments and more than 2,200 newly announced jobs in the region. However, there have also been cancellations and retractions of another $3.5 billion and more than 2,100 committed jobs because of policy changes by the Trump administration. Still, consumer demand for electric vehicles continues to grow in the region, led by Florida, where 1 in 10 new cars purchased in the last year were EVs. Georgia is second, with 1 in 12. The report says, quote, although the region experienced a slowdown in new investments over the past 12 months, the Southeast is still home to about 38% of all EV manufacturing investments and 33% of anticipated EV manufacturing jobs announced in the United States. The region accounts for 3 of the top 5 states for most investments in EV manufacturing: Georgia, North Carolina, then Tennessee, trailing only Michigan, unquote. However, it notes that much of that investment has been spurred by federal incentives for EV manufacturers and consumers. Southern states have invested little in encouraging the industry. The region's 2 largest EV-related investments came online just within the last 6 months. The Hyundai Motor Group's Meta plant opened in Ellabelle, Georgia, just west of Savannah, with 8,500 workers, and Toyota's new battery manufacturing plant in North Carolina, a little south of Greensboro, with 5,100 workers. The report concludes, quote, the rolling back and delaying of federal support for consumers and the EV industry undoubtedly jeopardizes near-term progress toward electrification goals, but it also risks undermining promising economic growth in the region and the opportunity to lead in a global industry. The coming year will show whether consumers, the private sector, utilities, and state governments can build on the market momentum created by federal policy, even as federal support subsides. Okay, now we're to my interview with Alexis Okeowo. She is a writer who has reported on conflict, human rights, and culture across Africa, Mexico, Europe, and the American South for The New Yorker and other publications. Okeowo is the author of A Moonless, Starless Sky, Ordinary Women, and Men Fighting Extremism in Africa, which received the 2018 PEN Open Book Award. Her work has also been anthologized in the Best American Sports Writing and the Best American Travel Writing. Okeowo was named Journalist of the Year by the Newswomen's Club of New York in 2020 and received the Reed Environmental Writing Award in 2022. Her just-released new book is called Blessings and Disasters, A Story of Alabama. It blends memoir with history and Okeowo's own reporting to paint a complex picture of the complex state where she grew up. Okeowo's parents were Nigerian immigrants who met as students at Alabama State University, a historically black university in Montgomery. After they married, the family followed an academic career path around the South, living in Houston, where Okeowo was born, and in my own city of Knoxville before ending up back in Montgomery, where she grew up and graduated from high school before heading off to Princeton University. The book is Okeowo's effort to come to a better understanding of her home state and the history, people, and geography that have shaped it. It's one of my favorite books about the South to come out this year, and I was happy for the opportunity to talk to her about it. So, Seth, let's go to the tape. All right. Alexis Okeowo, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start out by saying that I think Blessings and Disasters is a terrific book. It's so deeply reported, so well written, and I really love the way you kind of interweave the history of Alabama with these very kind of intimate portraits of many different people and people with different perspectives and experiences. I think, it's hard to write a biography of a state, but I feel like this really kind of gets at that. And I wanted to ask you to start out with, because you grew up in Alabama as the child of parents who had come there as immigrants. What was your sense of Alabama at the time? Like, there's one point early in the book where you said there was nothing you wanted so much, I think, as to be an American and to be a Southerner, to be from Alabama. What did that mean to you growing up there?
Yeah, I think growing up in Alabama, to me, I didn't know anything different. It was home. It felt like home. And I think that as a young person, a sense of belonging was what felt most important to me. And so, yeah, I do write that even though I sort of straddled different worlds as a young person, that of my school friends who were Southern, and then my family's friends who were West African, mostly West African, and feeling sort of caught, between those worlds. I did feel Southern foremost, and wanted to feel a part of that, wanted to belong to that identity. And so I think part of this book was trying to explore what belonging means when you don't fit into what people may think a Southerner is. And that is what I think a guiding principle of how I chose the people I spent time with in the book, and how I began to even probe my own family's history. And so then, growing up there, you graduated from high school and you left. You went to Princeton. You moved to New York. And I know you kept coming back to Alabama, obviously, for visits throughout all of that, but you were going and reporting in Africa and in Mexico. What drew you back there as a reporter? What made you want to really revisit and spend that much time really digging into that place? Well, it was only when I left that I realized that people's perceptions of the state, not just of the South, but of Alabama, were so extreme that it made me start to, as I write, sort of question my home even more than I already had, and wonder about the things that I didn't know. Because I felt like the more time I spent away, I started to believe the stereotypes about Alabama. I started to think of it as this place that was too far gone, that was a lost cause. And it was only in recent years that I questioned that assumption. And I kind of started to think of Alabama as a foreign country, like a place that I was very familiar with, but that I needed to investigate again and figure out why, A, it was the source of all of these stereotypes, and B, sort of reconcile those stereotypes with my own experience, which didn't fit those stereotypes in many ways. And so it was kind of, looking at Alabama as kind of like the other countries I've spent time in as a foreign correspondent.
Can you talk about the title a little bit, Blessings and Disasters? What does that signify to you, and how does it relate to Alabama?
Well, it's interesting because there are I've realized there are quite a few meanings, but one of them is that, when people talk about progress in Alabama and maybe more largely in the South, my sense of it, especially in Alabama, is that progress can feel like whiplash. Like, as soon as there's movement forward, backlash can come just as quickly. And so it's sort of like, you can get whiplash, just sort of trying to keep up. And so things that have felt like disasters have sometimes led to, blessings, and then vice versa. But I think it's also what makes the place so interesting. That you have a state that has been the home or the birthplace of the most extreme moments of American history. From the birth of the Confederacy to the Civil Rights Movement to, the home of Native American and Latino activism, and then repression against those same groups. I mean, it's whiplash. It's progress and backlash simultaneously all the time.
Yeah, and one through line, I think, in the book, and through the different people who you talk to and kind of share their stories and perspectives, is this sense of these constant struggles for like power and dignity and recognition by really anybody who's not part of the white male power structure that really has dominated Alabama for most of its history.
That's right.
And so, on the one hand, you could say, well, those stories are really endemic across the United States. Like, this is very much the story of the United States.
Yeah.
But you kind of make the case that a lot of those are more vivid and more stark in Alabama than they are a lot of other places. Like, what is it about Alabama that makes those struggles kind of, that puts them in such sharp relief?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, what I was trying to explore with this book is why this place has drawn people and continues to draw people, despite so many others having written it off. Why do people fight to stay from, the Native Americans who were nearly wiped out to sort of more recent Latino immigrants who have been, almost hunted down, but continue to stay. And, the answer is what you would find, I think, in a lot of places. Family, values, land, a sense of belonging within the smaller communities that make up Alabama. And I think, though, what makes Alabama unique is that it has such a broad cross-section of people for wanting to call it home, pushing to call it home, despite Alabama usually not loving them back. Part of it is like, why do you call a place home that doesn't really love you back or doesn't always love you back? And I think that what's most interesting about the state are its people, the people who do stay. That's why the state has come as far as it has, and why, the only reason it will get anywhere else is because of the people who stay. And so that's what I was interested in. And I was really pleasantly surprised and intrigued and frustrated and all of the things while, exploring that question.
Well, and I think it's really interesting that you show a lot of and maybe this is the gift of being a great reporter and a great writer, but you show a lot of, if not exactly sympathy, but attention to multiple points of view, including some that you obviously don't necessarily share yourself. I mean, I'm thinking about the conversations with Calvin Chappelle at the Confederate Museum, Memorial, I forget. I guess, why was it important to bring those voices in alongside voices that are maybe more obviously sympathetic?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was important because I wanted to, in some ways I wanted to illustrate how divergent viewpoints are from the different groups who call Alabama home, but also how sometimes they can converge. I think the reason Calvin and I were able to talk, even though we disagreed on nearly everything, was because there was a certain degree of openness to at least hearing each other, which I've traditionally found to be the case growing up in the South, but I think has obviously become worse, as in the rest of the country, because there's more suspicion, there's more fear, there's more anger about whether you can actually talk to someone you don't agree with. But I think the limits I found were that with the people I spent time with who I didn't agree with, we could hear each other, but that didn't necessarily change people's minds. And so I think that's kind of the kind of crisis we're in now, is like, yes, there's that Southern politeness. We'll greet you, we'll talk, we'll be nice. But will that translate to a kind of care for your neighbor, even if your neighbor's very different from you? And so, I think that's really the crisis that the South and the country is in right now. And so, as a journalist, I can do so much, which is talk to people and hear them out. But then there's still that other step.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. This is a point that I make a lot of times in talking about issues in the South. As you say, a lot of the country, a lot of the things that we are seeing play out at the national level now are things that people in the southern states are pretty familiar with.
Exactly.
We've seen these same fights for a while. I'm curious, what kind of response have you gotten specifically from people in Alabama, from Alabamians? Have you, gone to do book readings in Alabama or anything like that?
Mm-hmm. I have, and what I hear, what's interesting is that what I hear is that people can relate to, a lot of things I'm talking about, but then often their question is, but then how can we translate that to sort of change on the ground? Like now we're telling these more expanded stories, these more nuanced stories of this place that a lot of people have complicated feelings about being from. But then what next? And my question is, I wonder too, what next? Because I think a lot of people are hungering for more sort of nuanced stories, because, I think one thing I keep hearing over and over again is people being like, whether they're still in Alabama or in the South or elsewhere, is just feeling really, as I mentioned, sort of complicated feelings about being from a place that they're often not proud of, but feel a deep warmth and connection to. And so how do you wrestle with all of those things without dismissing it, or without sort of, endorsing things you don't approve of? And it is complicated, but I think like it's a valid, it's a valid struggle. And no place, deserves to be dismissed. And I think that's what a lot of people, that's the sense I've been getting. Like, no place deserves to be sort of dismissed. No people or place.
Right. Well, and it seems like over the course of your reporting, which sort of seems like it took place from the late teens into the early 20s here, that was a period where there started to, and your book reflects this, there's sort of like some hopeful notes. Some things start to, Roy Moore loses his race for the Senate. There's the creation of the Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery. You talk about the renaming of schools that had been named for Confederate leaders. There was the creation of a new majority black congressional district. And so all of that was kind of taking place up through 2024. And then, of course, this book is released into the world of 2025, where suddenly in the last 8 months, a lot of those quite recent gains start to feel really embattled and people are clawing things back. So I'm wondering if, like, does that feel disheartening to you? And also, does having written this book and seeing what you're talking about, the constant whiplash of kind of like progress and reaction to it, does that help give you perspective on what we're living through now? That, well, yes, this is what we do. We go forward, and then we have to fight to hold on to that.
Yes, unfortunately, yes. I mean, yes, it did give me. I was disappointed. I mean, like a lot of people, extremely disappointed to see so many things rolled back. But yes, looking back at history, sort of, digging into moments like Reconstruction, post-Civil War, where again there was this sliver of a moment when there was so much progress, not just for in terms of sort of black civil rights, but also this moment related to populism and sort of class-motivated organizing. And then, bam, that went again. And then until sort of really until the civil rights movement. But, so we've been here before. And I do think it's valid to hope that we will come out of this moment. But even still, it is very dismaying to see it happen when you're in it, because we don't know when we'll be out of it. I think is the hardest part.
Did you sense, or do you sense, any currents among younger generations in Alabama, maybe especially black Alabamians, but really younger people in general in Alabama, about their own sense of the state's trajectory? I mean, are there still people who want to stay there, who want to, kind of fight to make things better or hold on to gains that have been made?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I was doing an event, and a good friend from high school actually surprised me at the event. And it was so nice to sort of hear about the organizing work she's doing in Montgomery, in Alabama. And, I had spent some time with sort of organizers there, but just, meeting more people and just feeling, it just felt really reassuring and hopeful that people are staying around. People have stuck around and are doing meaningful work. And following a lot of platforms, organizing groups, whether it's with, housing, queer rights, class, progressive politics. There are people doing that kind of work, and I think, I think that work could be highlighted more. Absolutely. I mean, one thing this book has done, working on this book, has made me just realize how many stories there is still to be told from the state, from the region, and that's something I'd like to keep doing.
Great. Well, I thought I'd wrap up by just asking you for a few recommendations for people who either don't know Alabama or think they do know Alabama. What are some places that you would recommend going to, whether for purposes of natural beauty or history or culture, or, what are the places that you would say this, if you want to understand Alabama, you need to know this?
Yes. Well, definitely my hometown, Montgomery, just because it is sort of the nexus of the. It's sort of the nexus of all the historical memorials, museums, landmarks to what has happened in the state. As you mentioned, everything from the lynching memorial to older museums. Yeah, it's a really rich, interesting downtown. And then Birmingham, which is the biggest city, is like, I would say, our cultural nexus. You know, it's where sort of the interesting, galleries and cafes and restaurants and bookstores and film festivals are going on. I've always been partial to Mobile on the Gulf, like beautiful beaches, and the city sort of has a New Orleans vibe. It's a port city. And I think also, northern Alabama is just beautiful. It's just so green. And a lot of mountains up there. And, the state is just really also just beautiful to drive through. I would say it's great for a road trip.
Yeah, I've often found that. I make a lot of trips to New Orleans for both personal and professional reasons, and so there's that whole stretch you drive through Alabama there, and it's a very and I'm mostly on the interstate, but it's even at that, it's a very nice drive. And I think you're right that the geographic diversity of the state is maybe something people don't think about, that it really does run from the mountains all the way down through the Black Belt and then all the way down to the coast there. There's not many states that can claim that. Totally. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. So just thanks again. Thanks for the book, and thanks for the conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
The complex, sometimes confrontational Texas artist David Jeremiah is not shy in declaring his intentions. For a 2019 conceptual piece called The Lookout, the artist, who is black, turned a gallery space into a prison cell that he occupied for 21 days. Viewers were invited to don a white Ku Klux Klan hood and ink in a tattoo on his rib cage with a small pick. His latest installation at the Modern Art Museum of Fort Worth is a little more abstract, an assemblage of 28 black and polychromatic paintings on geometrically shaped pieces of wood, each over 10 feet tall. The exhibit is called The Fire This Time, a presumed reference both to James Baldwin's classic book, The Fire Next Time, and to the African-American gospel song that inspired it. David Jeremiah refers to the exhibit as a, quote, inverted performance installation, in which the viewers become actors of a sort by walking through it. The large panels suggest dark looming figures gathered around a campfire, while also referencing the geometry of the hoods of Lamborghini sports cars. Lamborghinis are a repeated motif in his work, which he has said is for both aesthetic and metaphorical reasons. In a 2021 interview, he said, quote, body, machine, object, however you want to categorize it, Lamborghinis are the most aesthetically pleasing things I've ever seen, unquote. He noted that the Italian car company started naming its models after famous Spanish fighting bulls. Quote, so you have this perfect, beautiful, futuristically aggressive machine body built for performance, whose essence is trapped in ritualistic violence. Ritualistic violence is definitely one way you could describe bullfighting. If there's another perfect, beautiful body built for performance, one that's also trapped in the mix of ritualistic violence, it's the human body. Obviously, since we can't stop doing each other dirty. So anytime I make a Lambo reference, using shape, a color scheme, or a shout-out, it's just me connecting the object to humanity in a very specific, flesh and blood, visceral way. A gore that stays desirable while performing itself, unquote. The exhibit is on display at the museum through November 2nd. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. If you do feel moved to make a donation, first of all, thank you. And second, make sure you make a note in the comments accompanying it that it is for the Progressive South. Thanks to our friends in Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. You can also write me at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org.